And we welcome back for the 5th of 5 consecutive appearances here on the agenda all week long, Paul Summerville, the Senior Fellow from the Center for Global Studies at the University of Victoria, the former Chief Economist of RBC Capital. And we finished off yesterday's program talking, you very nicely led us into a discussion about moral hazard,
yes,
of which there was plenty in Wall Street over the last couple of years. And now that we're just sort of finishing up on the G8, G20 here in the province of Ontario, as we rethink economics, let's start there. Moral hazard is what?
It's getting nice people to do the wrong thing.
That's a very good description of it.
Well, I think it's getting people to do stuff they wouldn't otherwise do, and you're creating a perverse incentive. So,
who creates the perverse incentive?
Well, I think it's a combination of, I think ultimately the community is responsible, but it's a combination of how governments behave. It's a function of how companies behave as a consequence of a framework that's been put in place. I think it's very cultural. You know, the degree to which people pay their taxes or they cheat on their taxes, because that's the word. You know, you either pay them or you cheat on them. The moral compass that you know, that people have. I often think again about, you know, Paul Martin when he said "come hell or high water." There was something that he could connect to culturally for Canadians, and Canadians went, "We get this. We're going to have to pull up our socks. This isn't sustainable."
Got to balance the books.
Yeah,
Can't run deficits forever.
And so we're seeing this in Greece right now. And so Greek leaders are saying, "come hell or high water," and we're going to find out whether or not culture they're going to be able to do it or not.
Let me take you to Wall Street.
Sure.
And how moral hazard relates to the current fiscal crisis that everybody's just gone through, financial crisis. What were the incentives that were in place that got, as you described them, nice people to do very bad, dumb things?
They didn't become bad until it was evident that a lot of the assumptions, again, about the housing market and about the models, turned out to be wrong. The reality is that they were incented to do that because it made them very wealthy. And so greed became a very important part, is always an important part of moral hazard. Greed in terms of whether you're actually a dollar value to it or you're getting something that really ought not to have. But I guess I've been resisting this constant, you know, it's Wall Street or it's Bay Street or it's financial services. And there's a lot of blame there, there's no question. And again, Michael Lewis talks about that very eloquently.
But it goes beyond that, obviously.
It goes much beyond that. And again, I think it's a cultural issue. I think it's a political issue, what your leaders are telling you, what your leaders are giving you, what your leaders are promising you. We have a big issue in modern high-income democracies, and that is politicians keep giving people present-day entitlements based on tax revenues that we don't have yet. Many taxpayers who aren't even born yet. And so how do you call that out without sounding like you're not committed to things like public education, or the science of good health for everybody? So there's a huge context that occurs in, and that's why I think the problems in the United States were so catastrophic.
But was there a sense on Wall Street that there's no mileage in it for us to behave properly? There's no mileage in it for us not to be greedy. There's no mileage in it for us not to overextend ourselves and be crazy risky, because we know at the end of the day the taxpayer will have to come in and bail us out.
Well, that obviously is the biggest problem in the United States, and I think again it's a problem for modern high-income democracies, because the way that a failure of a single financial institution is often portrayed is it's the death knell of the entire financial system and the economy. America has been referred to as bailout nation, which really started in the early 1980s with the bailout of big bank Continental Illinois. If you look at the deposits of banks, of the 3,000 or so banks that have failed in the United States over the last 20 years, 99.8% of the deposits were returned back. I think we should get rid of deposit insurance.
Really?
100%. Or say $5,000, just for the sake of argument.
Would people put their money in the bank anymore if they couldn't be
They would
sure
if they
it was
took.
safe?
They would if they did their homework. They would if they said, "Well, hold on a second. Am I going to put this in Paul Somerville's savings and loan, where he's giving me 6%, or am I going to put it, you know, in RBC Dominion or Bank of Montreal or CIBC or TD or National Bank when they're offering me 3%? Because I'm going to do my homework as someone who's got money on the line, rather than, it doesn't matter. I'm going to put my $25,000 of savings in this institution who's only got 4 branches and they're offering more money, because if it blows up, I get all my money back. So there's a huge moral hazard even in something as innocuous as deposit insurance.
So take the safety net away and you think we might actually get better behavior by everybody?
Absolutely. The way I like to think about it, and again, partly again in my book, Canada's Excellent Future, I try to ask the question about how does a society govern itself? So individuals have a moral compass. We have policemen who fine us or put us in jail. But I think the most powerful thing is how communities organize themselves. And one of the biggest shocks of my life is when I went to Jerusalem. And I went to get on a bus for the first time in 1978 as a university student. And I was shocked that no one lines up. Everyone tried to get into the bus at the same time. Mm-hmm. So I was culturally trained that you line up.
You're Canadian.
Canadian,
that's what we do.
British,
yeah.
Wherever that, and I'm sure there's other countries, not to cast aspersions, about people getting on buses in Jerusalem. So what governs a lineup? If you think about it for a second, people standing in line. Have you ever experienced in your long life someone saying, I'm going to go to the head of the line, and there's not some enormous reaction? We don't need policemen. Mm-hmm. We don't need someone handing out a ticket.
We self-govern.
We don't even need, we don't need fisticuffs. We self-govern. We're, when we come to the ATM machine and we're really, really busy, and there's, 4 people there, and we Canadians, we stand politely back, whatever the distance is. I think I've measured, it's about 10 feet, right?
Okay.
So we're 10 feet back. We self-govern. So societies that can create the rule of law, where people are unlike Mexico, unlike maybe Brazil, where the state is playing a role to create a common framework where everyone is treated as a citizen, is probably more likely to line up really politely and self-govern themselves. So the more we educate individuals in terms of what it is to be financially literate, what's compound interest, what does it mean when you have a credit card and you don't pay off your monthly balances, what does it mean to buy a house that you can't afford, what is an RSP, what's a tax-free account, all these things. If we educate our children about those things, I think the risk that people will make the mistakes in terms of speculating on the housing market is going to be a lot less. And similarly, in terms of how we run our companies, and we think about the responsibility that companies have, and the framework of law that companies operate
Well, let me follow up on that, because the great moral hazard example, of course, is how Wall Street acted over the years leading up to the financial meltdown. They acted with reckless abandon and didn't seem to understand that the government wasn't going to let them fail, and therefore they made a lot of crazy, risky decisions. Would you say the same thing about General Motors and Chrysler? That they ran their companies badly because they knew at the end of the day governments wouldn't let them fail, and now the government of Canada and the government of Ontario own good chunks of those 2 companies.
Well, I don't want to speak badly of the leadership of those companies. I did my Ph.D. thesis on the automotive industry. And I can tell you in 1988, when I was studying the industry, it was absolutely clear that American automotive industry had no chance against companies that wanted to create a product that people would always come back to because it was reliable, because it wasn't designed to fail. It was designed to get better every single year. And that's the reason why I think those companies eventually went bankrupt. Whether they, in the back of their minds, thought, well, we don't have to worry because we're going to get bailed out, that may be there, but at the end of the day, they were really badly run companies, and I'm not sure we should have bailed them out.
Should have let them go.
Well, I think we should have thought really hard. We should have made it very, very painful. You see, even when you think about bailing out a large firm, when a company goes bankrupt, you don't just have to let it implode. There's lots of mechanisms to steer a company through bankruptcy so the systemic risk to the financial system and to the broader economy can be managed. So it's not a zero-sum game. Mm-hmm. It's not, oh my goodness, these 3 companies are about to go bankrupt and everything's going to blow up. You can isolate, you can put a ring fence around that damage and make sure that you don't have the systemic risk.
Because certainly society, obviously a number of people in society would have said, what kind of signal are we sending? What kind of lesson are they learning if they can be this bad and yet have no consequences whatsoever?
I think we're sending the wrong message, and I think we're living the consequences. I think it's an issue in our healthcare system.
How so?
Well, I think that people try to get ahead of the line. I think there are lots of people who join boards of directors of hospitals for raising funds because, you know, if it really came down to it and their kid got in an accident or something happened to them, they feel they could jump the line. So I think we've created a real problem of moral hazard, not only in terms of the state getting in areas where it doesn't belong and promising, you know, things that people should have that they don't, but really standing back and thinking about how do we govern ourselves as a society. And I actually think that is one of Canada's enormous strategic advantages, that we can tweak a few things and particularly invest in our education system about getting it when we talk about financial issues, but we're going to end up in a much better place. Much more difficult, I think, for a country than, say, Mexico. You know, the kinds of remedies or the kind of things that an excellent future for Canada would demand are very different than what Mexico is going to have to do, or what India is going to have to do, or what even Japan is going to have to do. So every country is at a different point in its kind of moral hazard. And I think liberals, particularly, who believe that the state has a role, who believes that individuals are made, not born, believe that the community has a role in creating this framework, really have to answer that question. That, to me, is the most important question right now on the agenda. You know, on the agenda of all modern countries is how do we create the right framework so that we improve the ability of societies to regulate themselves in the right way.
But if there is such a recognition, as you seem to think there is, that moral hazard is a bad thing, and we all know it's a bad thing, this kind of irresponsible behavior on purpose,
right.
Why is it so prevalent?
Because it's easy. Because politicians, leaders, can get away with promising things that other generations are paying for. My own view on our tax system is that we should get rid of as many tax cuts and transfers as we possibly can. We have to completely rethink how we integrate the citizen into our community in terms of making sure that they have the wherewithal to have a successful life. We have to get rid of, you know, $500 tax cuts for ballet lessons. We have to rethink the fact that the oil industry in Alberta is very dependent in their exploration on tax cuts. I mentioned to a friend of mine the other day, I said, I think we should just have a 30% tax rate. I call it smart and simple. I don't call it flat. Okay. A smart and simple tax rate of 30%. And he said, well, it would be really great because it would make taxes a lot simpler, but it would be the first time we ever paid 30%.
Because we've never paid that much? Is that what you're saying?
Of course not, because of all the write-offs and everything that you can do differently, and the free tickets at the Maple Leaf Gardens, and you know, the 1 month trip down to Phoenix where you rent a house and you bring in someone for 2 days. So there's moral hazard is a very powerful consequence of the way that we've organized our societies, and it's a big issue for democracies.
You're a very difficult guy to pigeonhole. And I say this because you ran for the NDP, but you'd let the auto industry go under. All those unionized jobs. And I'm not sure if you know, but there's a bit of a relationship between organized labor and the NDP.
I've heard of
this.
Sure.
On the other hand, you know, you want to tax people who make high incomes a lot more than they're currently being taxed.
First of all, I want to make sure that they pay 30%.
Which, you know, we're not sure they're doing
I'm not convinced that that a lot of people are necessarily.
So you're a guy who, you know, made a good living on Bay Street, and yet you're not in favor of radically reducing income taxes. I'm trying to figure you out, Paul. Where are you?
Well, where I am is someone who asked this question: what's the right way to deliver the instruments of social justice that will create an excellent future for our children? And I'm absolutely convinced that it's not the things that we're doing now. That in fact the state is doing too many things. Look in the United Kingdom, for example. The grandfather of UK's welfare system is Winston Churchill. And he had this huge blind spot because he didn't believe in moral hazard. He believed that if you gave individuals a chance, they would do everything they could to improve their lot in life. Well, that's turned out not to be the case. There's lots of evidence that entitlement programs steer people to do just that much and not a whole lot more. So the point is how can you create a framework that is, first of all, inclusive, that's affordable and measurable? All our public policies, I think, should try to go through that litany. Is it inclusive? One of the reasons I'm vehemently opposed to Bill 94, which is the bill that Jean Charest is bringing forward in Quebec legislature, which denies public services to women who wear the niqab or the burqa, because you're activating the state essentially in a way that I think is tremendously dangerous. In the same way that we activated the state, my wife is Japanese, my son is Eurasian, to essentially take Canadians out of their homes if they were Japanese Canadian and put them in concentration camps for 4 years. How does the state act? What's the state doing? And if the state is designing policies which are designed to improve education, designed to give people a sustainable opportunity to access the science of good wealth with the responsibility to use it properly, making sure that you're getting community outcomes which are consistent with best-in-class outcomes for rich countries, and allowing people to make a living, allowing people to be successful in the marketplace. Designing that kind of framework, which I think starts with the rule of law, then I think you end up in a much better place than we are now. And I think every modern economy today is in a way dealing with this problem. And I think what's fascinating is that at the beginning of the last century, the divergence between societies was very narrow. You had a lot of monarchies, constitutional monarchies. By 1945, you had Adolf Hitler running Germany, you had Mussolini running Italy, you had Tojo running Japan, you had Franklin Roosevelt in the United States. This was not sustainable. Eventually, something had to break. And the number of societies and the differentiation started to narrow. And the two signposts for that was the decision of the Chinese in 1978 to adopt market capitalism, because they had no choice. They hit a brick wall. It's like traffic in Toronto. We're about 2 years away from the brick wall being hit and say, okay, we have to toll our roads and we have to have good public transit. The second thing, signpost was 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell. Now the number and the types of societies narrowed. It was the Washington Consensus. The state should be small. The market is smart. We need to educate our kids. Everyone was saying the same thing. I think now, after the failure of the market consensus, 9/11, we're starting to do this again. And the challenge will be, do you end up with someone like Adolf Hitler or Benito Mussolini, or do you end up with someone like Mackenzie King or Franklin Roosevelt or Winston Churchill? Where are we going to end up? And I think these are really important questions that weren't being asked 5 years ago. They're being asked right now for many of the reasons that we've talked about in the last 5 days.
That's a wonderful place to leave it. I can't thank you enough for spending 5 days with us here on TVO. Paul, your absence on these airwaves, which was professionally required in your previous job, yes, I'm very glad is over.
Thank you.
And it's good to have you back on our airwaves again. All the best.
Thank you.